Hey, Renita. Wow, this is super interesting. The computer is marking all kinds of things right that aren't actually right. So let me show you a couple of things on this assignment, and you don't have to go back and redo anything because I mean you have the credit. But when you go forward to use the factoring, this will really mess you up. So the computer's giving you some not very good information. For something to be factored, it has to be things multiplying. So for instance, if I wanted to factor, 6 down to its primes, it would be 2 times 3. And that's what factoring is breaking something down to a series of multiplications. Um, so this is 3x squared times this whole thing. It's just like this. It's there's adding and subtracting happening within the parentheses, but at the end of it, it's something times something. So that's what we're shooting for with factoring. So we see that here, this times everything in these parentheses. This parent set times this set. So this isn't actually factored, even though the computer is marking it right. That is not the real answer. And it's because we have multiplication here, but then it's plus some more multiplication. So we really have two things that we would add. The adding is the last step in the order of operations. And it has to be written as, like this is over here, two things multiplying. So even though this is right in that if you multiply those back, you get here, it wasn't done. So like, yikes that the computer is marking that correct, because that ends up not serving you well in the next class. So let me show you how to get from here to here. And this is what all the rest of this assignment is about. So if I have this, and this was the first step. Like from here, this is exactly what I would do. This would be the next line I would write. And then to finish this, because I have to have it as parentheses times parentheses. I can't have two things adding. I have to have two things multiplying. If you think of this instead of those parentheses, because sometimes people have a hard time with that, pretend this was AC plus 7C. Let's think of something a little bit easier for just a second. In that case, these C's right here are my common factor. So I'd pull a C out front and it would leave an A plus 7. Because then when I distribute C times A, there's the AC, C times 7, there's the 7C. So we're going to do that exact same thing up here, except now instead of just a C like this, it's a B plus 6. That whole chunk is the C. So I'm going to pull that B plus 6 out front, and that's going to leave me the exact same A plus 7 down there. And if I distribute, I could go B plus 6 times A, that's right here, and then B plus 6 times 7, that's right there. It's easier mechanically just to FOIL it out, but that's really what we're doing is this, when we FOIL, is this term times that A and this term times that 7. So all of these should really be in this form. This isn't fully factored, so even though the computer is marking it right, like I said, that wasn't, the computer is lying. It's not quite right. Let me show you this one, because this one has a little bit of tricky signs, and then I'll get down to that one that you actually asked about here. But this one has a nice little thing to point out. So let me get that original. Y squared minus 5y minus 6y plus 30. Okay, so we look at those first two terms and we think, what is the biggest thing I can pull out of both of these? What's the biggest thing these have in common? In this case, it's just going to be a y. So the y comes out front, and then I have y minus 5. So once I get this y minus 5, I got to get another one, because that's going to be my common factor that I factor out. So when I see this, I know another one of those is on its way. I just write it down. And then I look at what I have and I go, what do I have to take out of this to make it look exactly like that? Because this and this have to match so that it comes out front at the end and becomes the common factor. And what that does is it helps me not mess up the signs. So here, what do I multiply y by to make it negative 6y? Okay, well, negative 6. So negative 6 times y, there's our negative 6y. And then negative 6 times negative 5, that's our plus 30. But if you just write down where you have to get to, and the answer is right here, this is where you have to get to, it will help you get there. So now I can do that last step. And again, even though the computer's marking this right, if this was next quarter in the 102, 141, like this answer would really mess you up, because you wouldn't be able to do the next step of the problem. So here's the proper answer. Now we're going to take that y minus 5 out front, and then that leaves behind the y minus 6. And now that is fully factored because I have thing times thing. The operation there, the final operation in this problem is multiplication. So now let's take a look at that one, this one down here. So clear this. This one we got x cubed minus 8x squared plus 6x minus 48. Okay, so same idea. I forget about the second half of the problem. If it's got 4 terms, it's going to be a factor by grouping problem. So I look at those first 2 terms and I say, what is the biggest thing that these have in common? And remember that this, you don't want to write all this out every time, but just so I have something to point at here, this is what these really are. So the things that are in common, this has 2 x's and this has 2 x's. Like literally, if I just look at this and say, what parts match, that's it. That's your common factor. So that means I can take out an x squared out of an x cubed and an x squared. It's always going to be the smallest power, but that's why is the 2 x's are contained in the 3 x's. So then from here, I take out this x squared from here and it leaves an x. When I take the x squared out from 8x squared, it leaves the minus 8. So this was a factor of this, but it wasn't the greatest common factor. So always get the greatest common factor. Now we're going to, same rule I said last time, once I see this x minus 8, I got to get that again. So that's going to be x minus 8. And now what do I take out of here to make that happen? Looks like a plus 6, right? Because if I go 6 times x, I get my 6x. 6 times negative 8, there's my negative 48. So once you know what this is, use that to make this part easy because they got to match. Now I pull that out front. And then that is fully factored. And this piece doesn't factor any further. In future sections, when we have more techniques, we may run into ones where this piece will go a step further because it has that x squared, but not in this section. So that would be it. Hopefully that helps clear that up. And again, even though it's marking them right, that's not going to work out good for next quarter. So definitely make sure that if you have questions on what I just explained, get those asked.